The grand church was filled with the soft hum of classical music, the kind that made everyone feel like they were part of something magical. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns on the polished wooden pews. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers, their petals perfectly arranged to create an aisle fit for a queen. Every detail of the wedding had been meticulously planned, from the golden chandeliers to the velvet cushions on the seats. It was, after all, the wedding of one of the wealthiest men in the country, a millionaire known for his charm, success, and generosity. The guests, dressed in their finest suits and gowns, sat in quiet anticipation. At the front of the church, the millionaire stood tall and confident, his tuxedo perfectly tailored, his smile radiant. He looked every bit the man who had it all, wealth, power, and now, love. Beside him, the priest held an open Bible, ready to guide the couple through their vows. The bride, stunning in her lace wedding dress, stood a few steps away, her veil cascading down her back like a waterfall of silk. She looked at the millionaire with adoration, her eyes glistening with tears of joy. Everything was perfect. Too perfect. The priest cleared his throat and began the ceremony. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of this man and this woman in holy matrimony. His voice echoed through the church, calm and steady. The guests leaned forward, hanging on every word. The millionaire glanced at his bride, his heart swelling with happiness. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment he would say, "I do," and start a new chapter of his life. But just as the priest turned to the millionaire and asked, "Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" a loud, desperate voice shattered the silence. "Stop the wedding. You can't marry her." Heads turned, and gasps filled the air. A little boy, no older than 10, burst through the church doors, his face flushed and his chest heaving as if he had been running for miles. His clothes were disheveled, his hair a mess, and his eyes wide with fear. He looked around frantically, his gaze landing on the millionaire. The millionaire froze, his smile fading. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. The boy ran down the aisle, his small feet pounding against the marble floor. "You can't marry her," he repeated, his voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. "Please, you have to stop." The guests murmured among themselves, their whispers growing louder. The bride's face turned pale, her hands clutching her bouquet tightly. The priest stepped forward, trying to calm the situation. "Young man, this is a sacred ceremony. You can't just—" "I have to," the boy interrupted, his eyes pleading. "It's important. Please, you have to listen to me." The millionaire held up a hand, silencing the priest. He knelt down to the boy's level, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "What's wrong, son? Why are you here?" The boy hesitated, glancing at the crowd. He leaned in close to the millionaire and whispered something in his ear. The millionaire's eyes widened, and his face went pale. He stood up abruptly, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice firm but shaky. "The wedding is off." The church erupted in chaos. Guests stood up, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of shock and disbelief. The bride dropped her bouquet, her hands flying to her mouth. "What are you saying?" she cried. "You can't just—" "I'm sorry," the millionaire repeated, his tone final. He turned to the boy. "Come with me." Without another word, he took the boy by the hand and led him out of the church, leaving everyone behind. The guests watched in stunned silence as the millionaire and the boy disappeared through the doors, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. Outside, the millionaire pulled the boy aside, his heart racing. "What did you say to me back there?" he demanded. "What do you mean, she's not who you think she is?" The boy looked up at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I can't explain everything right now," he said. "But if you marry her, something terrible will happen. Something that will change everything." The millionaire stared at the boy, his mind racing. He wanted to dismiss the boy's words as the ramblings of a child, but something about the boy's urgency felt real. Too real. "Who are you?" he asked. "And how do you know all this?" The boy hesitated, then held up his wrist. A strange device, unlike anything the millionaire had ever seen, was strapped to it. It glowed faintly, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change. "I'm from the future," the boy said quietly. "And I came back to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life." The millionaire's breath caught in his throat. He wanted to laugh, to tell the boy he was crazy, but the look in the boy's eyes stopped him. There was no hint of deception, no sign that this was a prank. Only fear. And truth. "What happens if I marry her?" the millionaire asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy's expression darkened. "If you marry her," he said, "the world will end." The millionaire stood frozen, his mind racing as he tried to process the boy's words. The world will end? It sounded like something out of a science fiction movie, not real life. But the boy's eyes, those wide, fearful eyes, held a truth that was impossible to ignore. "You're saying, you're from the future?" the millionaire asked, his voice trembling. He glanced around, half expecting someone to jump out and yell, "Gotcha!" But the street outside the church was empty, save for a few parked cars and the distant sound of traffic. The boy nodded, his small hands clutching the strange device on his wrist. "I know it's hard to believe," he said. "But I don't have much time to explain. They're already looking for me." "Who's looking for you?" the millionaire asked, his concern growing. The boy hesitated, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. "The people who want to keep the future the way it is," he said. "The people who want you to marry her." The millionaire's stomach churned. He thought of his bride, the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had been ready to spend the rest of his life with. Could she really be part of something so sinister? It didn't seem possible. And yet. "Why should I believe you?" he asked, his voice firm but laced with doubt. "You're just a kid. How do I know this isn't some kind of prank?" The boy's face fell, and for a moment, he looked much older than his years. "I knew you'd say that," he said quietly. "That's why I brought this." He held up the device on his wrist, its surface glowing faintly. "This is a time-traveling device. It's how I got here. And it's how I can prove I'm telling the truth." The millionaire stared at the device, his curiosity piqued. It looked like nothing he had ever seen before, sleek and futuristic, with symbols that seemed to shift and change as he watched. "How does it work?" he asked. The boy pressed a button on the side of the device, and a holographic image flickered to life in the air between them. The millionaire's breath caught in his throat as he saw a scene unfold before his eyes, a scene of chaos and destruction. Buildings crumbled, fires raged, and people ran screaming through the streets. The sky was dark, filled with smoke and ash, and in the center of it all was a face the millionaire recognized all too well. His own face. What is this?" the millionaire whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is the future," the boy said, his tone grim. "Your future. If you marry her, this is what happens." The millionaire's legs felt weak, and he leaned against the wall for support. "How?" he asked. "How could marrying her cause all of this?" The boy hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "She's not who you think she is," he said finally. "She's part of a secret organization, a group of people who want to control the world. They've been planning this for years. And if you marry her, you'll give them everything they need to make it happen." The millionaire's mind raced. He thought of the woman he had fallen in love with, her smile, her laughter, the way she made him feel like he could conquer the world. Could it all have been a lie? Could she really be part of something so evil? "I need proof," he said, his voice firm. "Real proof. Not just, Holograms. The boy nodded, as if he had expected this. I can give you proof, he said. But we have to be careful. If they find out I'm here, they'll do whatever it takes to stop me. And you? The millionaire's heart pounded in his chest. This was insane. It had to be. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that the boy was telling the truth. All right, he said finally. What do we do? The boy's expression softened, and for the first time, he looked like the child he was. Thank you, he said quietly. I know this is hard for you. But you have to trust me. The future depends on it. The millionaire took a deep breath, his mind made up. All right, he said. Let's go. The boy led him to a nearby alley, where a small, unassuming car was parked. Get in, he said, opening the door. We don't have much time. The millionaire hesitated for a moment, then climbed into the passenger seat. The boy got behind the wheel, his small hands gripping the steering wheel with surprising confidence. Where are we going? The millionaire asked. Somewhere safe, the boy replied. Somewhere we can talk without being watched. As the car pulled away from the curb, the millionaire glanced back at the church, his heart heavy with doubt and fear. He had left behind everything, his wedding, his bride, his life as he knew it, all because of a boy who claimed to be from the future. Was he making the biggest mistake of his life? Or was this the only way to save the world? Only time would tell. The car sped through the quiet streets, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the silence. The millionaire sat in the passenger seat, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He glanced at the boy, who was focused on the road, his small hands gripping the steering wheel with surprising skill. The boy's face was serious, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds as if expecting someone to follow them. Where are we going? The millionaire asked again, his voice low. Somewhere safe, the boy replied, his tone firm. A place where we can talk without being interrupted. The millionaire nodded, though his unease grew with every passing minute. He couldn't believe he was in a car with a child who claimed to be from the future, fleeing from a wedding that could supposedly destroy the world. It felt like a dream, a bizarre, unsettling dream. But the holographic image the boy had shown him was burned into his mind. The destruction, the chaos, his own face at the center of it all. It was too real to dismiss. After what felt like an eternity, the boy pulled into a secluded parking lot behind an old, abandoned warehouse. The building looked like it hadn't been used in years, its windows broken and its walls covered in graffiti. The boy parked the car and turned off the engine, his expression tense. We're here, he said, opening the door. Follow me. The millionaire hesitated for a moment, then stepped out of the car. The air was cool, and the silence was almost eerie. The boy led him to a side door, which creaked loudly as he pushed it open. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit, with sunlight streaming through cracks in the roof. Dust motes floated in the air, and the floor was littered with debris. This is where I've been staying, the boy said, his voice echoing in the empty space. It's not much, but it's safe. The millionaire looked around, his curiosity piqued. In the corner of the warehouse was a makeshift bed, a small table, and a few supplies, food, water, and what looked like tools. But what caught his attention was the device on the boy's wrist. It glowed faintly, its surface covered in shifting symbols. What is that thing? The millionaire asked, pointing to the device. You said it's a time-traveling device. How does it work? The boy glanced down at the device, his expression unreadable. It's complicated, he said. But I'll try to explain. He sat down on the edge of the bed and motioned for the millionaire to join him. The millionaire sat down, his eyes never leaving the device. Go on, he said. The boy took a deep breath. This device is called a chronolink, he began. It's a prototype, created by scientists in the future. It allows the user to travel through time by creating a temporary rift in the space-time continuum. The millionaire blinked, trying to process the words. A rift in the what? The boy sighed, realizing he needed to simplify. It's like a doorway, he said. A doorway that lets you move between different points in time. But it's not perfect. It can only be used a few times before it runs out of energy. And it's dangerous. If you're not careful, you could get stuck in the wrong time, or worse. The millionaire's eyes widened. And you use this to come here? To stop my wedding? The boy nodded. I had to, he said. In my time, the world is gone. Everything you saw in that hologram, it's real. And it all started because of you. The millionaire's heart sank. Because of me? How? The boy hesitated, as if unsure how much to reveal. In the future, you become one of the most powerful men in the world, he said. But that power comes at a cost. The people you trust, the people you love, they use you. They manipulate you. And when you marry her, it gives them everything they need to take control. The millionaire's mind raced. He thought of his bride, the woman he had been ready to spend the rest of his life with. Could she really be part of something so evil? It seemed impossible. And yet, the boy's words rang with a chilling truth. How do I know you're not lying? The millionaire asked, his voice tinged with desperation. How do I know this isn't some kind of trick? The boy's expression softened, and for the first time, he looked like the child he was. I know it's hard to believe, he said. But I'm not lying. I came here because I had to. Because if I didn't, no one else would. The millionaire stared at the boy, his heart heavy with doubt and fear. He wanted to believe him, but the idea of his bride being part of a secret organization was too much to grasp. What do I do? He asked finally. How do I stop this? The boy's eyes lit up with determination. First, you need to understand the truth, he said. And then, we need to act. But we have to be careful. If they find out what we're doing, they'll stop us. And if they stop us, the future is lost. The millionaire nodded, his resolve hardening. All right, he said. What's the plan? The boy leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. We need to find proof, he said. Proof that she's not who she says she is. And once we have that, we can expose her. But we have to move fast. Time is running out. The millionaire took a deep breath, his mind made up. All right, he said. Let's do this. The boy smiled, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly. You're doing the right thing. As they sat there in the dimly lit warehouse, the millionaire couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change forever. The boy's words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of what was at stake. The future. The world. Everything. And it all started with a little boy and a device that could change time. The millionaire sat in the dimly lit warehouse, his mind racing as he processed everything the boy had told him. The idea that his bride, the woman he had been ready to spend the rest of his life with, could be part of a secret organization bent on world domination was almost too much to believe. And yet, the boy's words, the holographic images, and the strange device on his wrist all pointed to one undeniable truth: something was very, very wrong. All right, the millionaire said finally, breaking the silence. If we're going to do this, we need a plan. Where do we start? The boy looked up at him, his eyes filled with determination. We start with her, he said. We need to find out who she really is. And to do that, we need to dig into her past. The millionaire nodded, though the thought of investigating the woman he loved made his stomach churn. How do we do that without tipping her off? He asked. If she's part of some secret organization, she'll be watching me closely. The boy thought for a moment, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek device. It looked like a smartphone, but its screen was covered in the same shifting symbols as the chronolink on his wrist. "This is a data tracker," he explained. "It can access any database in the world, past, present, or future. We can use it to find out everything about her." The millionaire raised an eyebrow. "You just happen to have a device that can hack into any database?" The boy shrugged. "When you're from the future, you come prepared." The millionaire couldn't help but smile, despite the gravity of the situation. "All right," he said. "Let's see what we can find." The boy powered on the data tracker, and its screen lit up with a soft blue glow. He tapped a few symbols, and a holographic keyboard appeared in the air. The millionaire watched in awe as the boy typed in a series of commands, his small fingers moving with practiced ease. "What's her full name?" the boy asked. The millionaire hesitated for a moment, then said, "Emily Carter." The boy nodded and entered the name into the device. The screen flickered, and a flood of information appeared: birth records, school transcripts, employment history, and more. The millionaire leaned closer, his eyes scanning the data. "This all looks normal," he said after a moment. "Nothing out of the ordinary." The boy frowned. "That's the problem," he said. "It's too normal. No one's life is this perfect. There has to be something they're hiding." He tapped a few more symbols, and the screen shifted, displaying a series of encrypted files. The boy's eyes lit up. "Bingo," he said. "These files are protected by some serious firewalls. Whoever she is, she doesn't want anyone seeing this." "Can you break through?" the millionaire asked. The boy smirked. "Give me a minute." He typed furiously, his fingers a blur as he worked to bypass the encryption. The millionaire watched in silence, his heart pounding in his chest. After what felt like an eternity, the boy let out a triumphant, "Aha," and the screen filled with new information. The millionaire's eyes widened as he read through the files. They contained detailed records of Emily's involvement with a shadowy organization known as the Eclipse Syndicate. The group was described as a global network of powerful individuals who manipulated world events from behind the scenes, using wealth, technology, and even violence to achieve their goals. "This can't be real," the millionaire whispered, his voice shaking. "Emily, she's part of this?" The boy nodded grimly. "According to these files, she's been working for them for years. Her job was to get close to you, to gain your trust and access to your resources. Once you married her, they planned to use your wealth and influence to take control of key industries, destabilize governments, and eventually, well, you saw what happens." The millionaire's stomach turned. He thought of all the times Emily had smiled at him, laughed with him, told him she loved him. Had it all been a lie? Had she been playing him this entire time? "I need to see her," he said suddenly, standing up. "I need to look her in the eye and ask her if this is true." The boy shook his head. "You can't," he said firmly. "If you confront her now, she'll know we're onto her. And if she alerts the syndicate, we're done for." The millionaire clenched his fists, his frustration boiling over. "Then what do we do? We can't just sit here and do nothing." The boy stood up, his expression calm but determined. "We gather more evidence," he said. "We need proof that's undeniable, something we can use to expose her and the syndicate. And then, we take them down." The millionaire took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "All right," he said finally. "What's the next step?" The boy glanced at the data tracker, then back at the millionaire. "We need to find someone who knows the truth," he said. "Someone who's worked with her, or against her. And I think I know just the person." "Who?" the millionaire asked. The boy's eyes narrowed. "A man named Victor Kane. He used to be one of the syndicate's top operatives, but he had a falling out with them. If we can find him, he might be willing to talk." The millionaire nodded, though the name meant nothing to him. Where do we find this Victor Kane? The boy tapped a few more symbols on the data tracker, and a map appeared on the screen. According to this, he's hiding out in a small town about 2 hours from here, he said. If we leave now, we can reach him by nightfall. The millionaire hesitated for a moment, then nodded. All right, he said. Let's go. As they left the warehouse and climbed back into the car, the millionaire couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into something much bigger, and much more dangerous, than he had ever imagined. But he knew there was no turning back now. The truth was out there, and he was determined to find it. The car sped down the highway, the hum of the engine the only sound breaking the tense silence. The millionaire gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Beside him, the boy sat with the data tracker in his hands, his small fingers tapping away at the holographic keyboard. How much farther? The millionaire asked, his voice tense. The boy glanced at the map on the screen. About an hour, he said. We're close. The millionaire nodded, though his mind was far from calm. The thought of confronting Victor Kane, a man who had supposedly been part of the Eclipse Syndicate, filled him with a mix of fear and determination. What if Kane refused to talk? What if he was just as dangerous as the people he had worked for? As they drove, the boy kept an eye on the data tracker, monitoring for any signs of trouble. We need to be careful, he said. If the syndicate finds out we're looking for Kane, they'll do whatever it takes to stop us. The millionaire glanced at the boy, his concern growing. Do you think they're already onto us? The boy hesitated, then nodded. It's possible. They have eyes everywhere. That's why we need to move fast. The millionaire's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He had always been a man of action, someone who faced challenges head-on. But this was different. This was a world of shadows and secrets, a world where the rules didn't apply. And he was completely out of his depth. As they approached the small town where Victor Kane was supposedly hiding, the boy pointed to a dirt road leading off the main highway. Turn here, he said. He's staying in a cabin just outside of town. The millionaire followed the boy's directions, the car bouncing along the rough road. The trees grew thicker, and the sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. It was quiet, too quiet. Finally, they reached a clearing, and the cabin came into view. It was small and rustic, with a wooden porch and a chimney puffing out thin wisps of smoke. The millionaire parked the car a short distance away, his heart pounding in his chest. This is it, the boy said, his voice low. Let's go. They stepped out of the car and approached the cabin cautiously. The millionaire's senses were on high alert, every sound magnified in the stillness of the forest. As they reached the porch, the boy motioned for the millionaire to stay back. Let me do the talking, he whispered. Kane might be more willing to trust a kid. The millionaire nodded, though he didn't like the idea of the boy taking the lead. But before they could knock on the door, a voice called out from behind them. Stop right there. They turned to see a man stepping out from the trees, a rifle in his hands. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a rugged face and piercing eyes. The millionaire recognized him immediately from the photos on the data tracker. Victor Kane. Who are you, and what do you want? Kane demanded, his voice sharp and commanding. The boy raised his hands slowly, showing he meant no harm. My name's not important, he said. But we need your help. We're trying to stop the Eclipse Syndicate. Kane's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer, the rifle still trained on them. And why should I believe you? The boy hesitated, then held up the data tracker. Because we have proof, he said. Proof that they're planning something big. And we think you're the only one who can help us stop it. Kane's gaze flicked to the device, and for a moment, he looked intrigued. But before he could respond, the sound of engines roaring in the distance caught their attention. The boy's face paled. They're here, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Kane's expression hardened. "Get inside," he barked, motioning toward the cabin. "Now." The millionaire and the boy didn't need to be told twice. They rushed inside, followed closely by Kane, who slammed the door shut and locked it behind them. Through the windows, they could see several black SUVs pulling into the clearing, their headlights cutting through the growing darkness. "Who are they?" the millionaire asked, his voice tense. "Syndicate operatives," Kane replied, his tone grim. "They've been after me for months. Looks like they finally found me." The boy's eyes widened. "We led them right to you," he said, his voice filled with guilt. Kane shook his head. "Doesn't matter now. What matters is getting out of here alive." He moved quickly, grabbing a bag from the corner of the room and stuffing it with supplies. The millionaire watched in silence, his mind racing. He had never been in a situation like this before, and the fear was almost overwhelming. But he knew he couldn't afford to panic, not now. "What's the plan?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Kane slung the bag over his shoulder and grabbed a set of keys from the table. "There's a jeep out back," he said. "We'll take that and head for the mountains. It's the only way to lose them." The millionaire nodded, though the thought of a high-speed chase through the forest made his stomach churn. But before they could move, the sound of footsteps on the porch made them freeze. "We know you're in there, Kane," a voice called out. "Come out quietly, and we might let you live." Kane's jaw tightened, and he motioned for the millionaire and the boy to follow him. "Stay close," he whispered. "And whatever you do, don't stop." They moved toward the back door, their footsteps silent on the wooden floor. But just as Kane reached for the handle, the front door burst open, and a group of armed men stormed inside. "Go!" Kane shouted, shoving the millionaire and the boy toward the door. "I'll hold them off." The millionaire hesitated, but the boy grabbed his hand and pulled him forward. "We have to go," he urged. They burst out of the cabin and ran toward the jeep, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. The millionaire's heart pounded in his chest as he climbed into the passenger seat, the boy scrambling into the back. Moments later, Kane jumped into the driver's seat and started the engine. "Hold on," he yelled, slamming his foot on the gas. The jeep shot forward, tearing through the forest as bullets whizzed past them. The millionaire gripped the door handle, his knuckles white, as Kane expertly navigated the rough terrain. Behind them, the SUVs gave chase, their headlights cutting through the darkness. The chase was on. The jeep roared through the dense forest, its tires kicking up dirt and leaves as Victor Kane expertly navigated the rough terrain. The millionaire clung to the door handle, his heart pounding as bullets whizzed past them. Behind them, the black SUVs were gaining ground, their headlights cutting through the darkness like predatory eyes. "They're not giving up," the boy shouted from the back seat, his voice barely audible over the engine's roar. Kane's jaw tightened as he glanced in the rearview mirror. "They never do," he muttered. "Hold on." He yanked the steering wheel to the left, sending the jeep skidding around a sharp turn. The millionaire's stomach lurched as the vehicle tilted precariously, its wheels barely staying on the ground. For a moment, he was sure they were going to flip, but Kane regained control just in time. "We can't keep this up forever," the millionaire yelled, his voice strained. "We need a plan." Kane's eyes flicked to the boy. "You said you have proof." "What kind of proof?" The boy hesitated, then held up the data tracker. "This device can show you the future," he said. "The future they're trying to create." Kane's expression darkened. "Show me." The boy tapped a few symbols on the device, and a holographic image flickered to life in the air between them. The millionaire's breath caught in his throat as he saw the same scene the boy had shown him earlier, a world in ruins, with crumbling buildings, raging fires, and people running in terror. But this time, the image was more detailed, more vivid. And in the center of it all was the millionaire's face, plastered on posters and billboards with the words, "The Architect of Destruction," written beneath it. Kane's eyes widened as he took in the scene. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "This is what happens if we don't stop them," the boy said, his voice trembling. "The Eclipse Syndicate uses his wealth and influence to take control of the world. They manipulate governments, destroy economies, and start wars. And by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's too late." Kane's grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles turning white. "I knew they were dangerous," he said, his voice low. "But this is beyond anything I imagined." The millionaire stared at the hologram, his stomach churning. He had seen the image before, but it still shook him to his core. "How do we stop it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The boy's expression hardened. "We expose them," he said. "We show the world what they're planning. But to do that, we need more than just this hologram. We need something concrete, something that can't be ignored." Kane nodded, his eyes narrowing as he focused on the road ahead. "I might be able to help with that," he said. "I have files, documents, recordings, everything I could gather before I left the syndicate. They're hidden in a safe house about 20 miles from here." The millionaire's heart leapt with hope. "Can we get there?" Kane glanced in the rearview mirror, his expression grim. "Not with them on our tail. We need to lose them first." As if on cue, a bullet shattered the Jeep's rear window, sending shards of glass flying. The boy ducked, his hands covering his head, while the millionaire instinctively shielded him with his body. "Hold on!" Kane shouted, slamming his foot on the gas. The Jeep shot forward, its engine roaring as it raced through the forest. Kane swerved around trees and rocks, his movements sharp and precise. The SUVs behind them struggled to keep up, their larger vehicles less suited to the rough terrain. "There's a river up ahead," Kane yelled. "If we can make it there, we might be able to lose them." The millionaire's heart pounded as he saw the river in the distance, its dark waters glinting in the moonlight. But the SUVs were closing in, their headlights growing brighter with every passing second. "They're gaining," the boy shouted, his voice filled with panic. Kane's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then back to the road. "We're not going to make it," he muttered. "Not like this." He reached into the bag at his feet and pulled out a small, cylindrical device. The millionaire's eyes widened as he recognized it, a smoke grenade. "When I say so, hold your breath," Kane ordered. The millionaire nodded, his heart racing. He glanced at the boy, who was clutching the data tracker tightly, his face pale but determined. As they approached the river, Kane yanked the pin from the grenade and tossed it out the window. Thick, billowing smoke filled the air, obscuring the road behind them. The SUVs skidded to a halt, their drivers blinded by the sudden cloud. "Now!" Kane shouted, slamming the brakes and yanking the steering wheel to the right. The Jeep skidded to a stop just short of the riverbank. Kane jumped out, motioning for the millionaire and the boy to follow. "This way," he yelled, leading them toward a narrow footbridge hidden among the trees. They crossed the bridge quickly, their footsteps echoing on the wooden planks. On the other side, Kane led them into a dense thicket, where a small, camouflaged boat was hidden. "Get in," he ordered, untying the boat and pushing it into the water. The millionaire and the boy climbed in, their breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. Kane jumped in after them and started the engine, steering the boat downstream as the sound of the SUVs faded into the distance. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of the water against the boat. The millionaire looked back at the riverbank, half expecting the syndicate operatives to appear at any moment. But the forest was quiet, the smoke from the grenade slowly dissipating in the night air. "We lost them," the boy said, his voice filled with relief. Kane nodded, though his expression was still tense. "For now," he said. "But they'll regroup. And when they do, they'll come after us harder than ever. The millionaire took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. What now? He asked. Kane's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was a flicker of hope in their depths. Now, he said, we get those files. And then, we take down the syndicate. The boat glided silently down the river, its engine barely a whisper as Victor Kane steered them toward the safe house. The millionaire sat in the back, his mind racing as he tried to process everything that had happened. The boy, still clutching the data tracker, stared at the water, his expression unreadable. How much farther? The millionaire asked, breaking the silence. Kane glanced at him, his face shadowed in the moonlight. Not far, he said. But we need to be careful. If the syndicate has figured out where we're going, they'll be waiting for us. The millionaire nodded, though his stomach churned at the thought. He had never been a man of violence, but the stakes were too high to back down now. The future, his future, depended on what they did next. After what felt like an eternity, Kane guided the boat to a secluded dock hidden among the trees. He tied it up quickly and motioned for the millionaire and the boy to follow. Stay close, he whispered. And keep quiet. They moved through the forest, their footsteps soft on the damp ground. The safe house was a small, unassuming cabin, its windows dark and its door slightly ajar. Kane paused at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of movement. Something's wrong, he muttered. The door shouldn't be open. The millionaire's heart skipped a beat. Do you think they're already here? Kane didn't answer. Instead, he pulled a pistol from his belt and motioned for them to stay back. Wait here, he said. I'll check it out. The millionaire wanted to argue, but he knew better than to question Kane's expertise. He watched as Kane approached the cabin, his movements slow and deliberate. The boy stood beside him, his small hand gripping the millionaire's sleeve. What if they're inside? The boy whispered, his voice trembling. We'll figure it out, the millionaire replied, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. Kane reached the door and pushed it open slowly, his gun raised. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a loud crash echoed from inside the cabin, followed by the sound of a struggle. Kane, the millionaire shouted, his fear overriding his caution. He and the boy rushed toward the cabin, their hearts pounding. Inside, they found Kane grappling with a syndicate operative, the two men locked in a fierce battle. The operative was larger and stronger, but Kane was faster, his movements precise and calculated. Get the files. Kane yelled, his voice strained. They're in the floorboard under the table. The millionaire hesitated for a moment, then grabbed the boy's hand and pulled him toward the table. They lifted it aside, revealing a hidden compartment in the floor. Inside was a small metal box, its surface covered in scratches and dents. This is it, the boy said, his eyes wide with excitement. But before they could open the box, the sound of gunfire filled the air. The millionaire ducked instinctively, pulling the boy down with him. He looked up to see Kane standing over the fallen operative, his chest heaving and his gun still smoking. We need to go, Kane said, his voice urgent. Now. The millionaire nodded, grabbing the box and tucking it under his arm. They rushed out of the cabin, their footsteps echoing in the night. But as they reached the edge of the clearing, a voice called out from behind them. Leaving so soon? They turned to see a group of syndicate operatives stepping out of the shadows, their guns trained on them. At the front of the group was a woman, the millionaire's bride, Emily. The millionaire's heart sank as he looked at her, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman he had loved with the cold, calculating figure standing before him. Emily, he whispered, his voice filled with pain. Emily's lips curled into a cruel smile. You should have stayed out of this, she said. But now, you've left me no choice. Kane stepped forward, his gun raised. You're not taking them, he said, his voice firm. Emily's smile widened. Brave words, she said. But you're outnumbered. The millionaire glanced at Kane, then at the boy, who was clutching the data tracker tightly. He knew they were out of options. But as he looked at Emily, something inside him snapped. You used me, he said, his voice trembling with anger. Everything we had, it was all a lie. Emily's expression softened for a moment, but then she shook her head. It was never personal, she said. Just business. The millionaire's hands clenched into fists, his fear giving way to rage. You're not going to win, he said. We'll stop you. No matter what it takes. Emily's smile faded, and she raised her gun. We'll see about that. Emily's smile faded, and she raised her gun. We'll see about that. But before she could pull the trigger, the boy stepped forward, holding up the data tracker. You're too late, he said, his voice steady. The truth is already out. Emily's eyes widened as the data tracker's screen lit up, displaying a live broadcast. On the screen was the holographic image of the ruined future, along with the files from the metal box. The words, Eclipse Syndicate Exposed, flashed across the bottom of the screen. What have you done? Emily demanded, her voice filled with fury. The boy smiled, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. We stopped you, he said. And now, the whole world knows the truth. Emily's face twisted with rage, and she raised her gun again. But before she could fire, the sound of sirens filled the air. The syndicate operatives looked around in confusion as police cars and news vans flooded the clearing, their lights flashing and their cameras rolling. It's over, Kane said, his voice filled with relief. Emily hesitated for a moment, then lowered her gun. This isn't the end, she said, her voice cold. You'll regret this. As the police moved in to arrest the syndicate operatives, the millionaire felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. He looked at the boy, who was still holding the data tracker, and smiled. We did it, he said, his voice filled with awe. The boy nodded, his expression serious. We did, he said. But there's still one more thing we need to do. The millionaire frowned. What's that? The boy looked up at him, his eyes filled with determination. We need to make sure this never happens again. The clearing was chaos. Police officers swarmed the area, arresting syndicate operatives while reporters filmed the scene, their cameras capturing every detail. The millionaire stood amidst the commotion, his mind still reeling from everything that had happened. Emily was gone, taken into custody, but her words echoed in his mind, this isn't the end. The boy tugged at his sleeve, pulling him back to the present. We need to go, he said urgently. There's no time to waste. The millionaire nodded, though his legs felt like lead. He followed the boy and Kane as they slipped away from the chaos, moving deeper into the forest. The metal box containing the syndicate's files was tucked securely under his arm, its weight a constant reminder of what was at stake. Where are we going? The millionaire asked as they walked. Somewhere safe, Kane replied, his voice low. We need to go through these files and figure out what they were really planning. There's more to this than we know. The boy nodded in agreement. The syndicate doesn't just want power, he said. They want control. And they were using your wedding as a cover for something much bigger. The millionaire's stomach churned. What do you mean? The boy hesitated, then said, You'll see. They reached a small, hidden cave tucked into the side of a hill. Kane led them inside, where a makeshift workspace had been set up, a table, a few chairs, and a laptop connected to a portable generator. The boy placed the data tracker on the table and began transferring the files from the metal box to the laptop. As the files loaded, the millionaire sat down, his mind racing. He thought of Emily, of the life they had almost built together. Had any of it been real? Or had it all been part of her plan? The thought made his chest ache. Here, the boy said, pulling him out of his thoughts. This is what we've been looking for. The laptop screen filled with documents, blueprints, and encrypted messages. The millionaire leaned closer, his eyes scanning the information. What he saw made his blood run cold. This can't be real, he whispered. The files detailed a massive operation codenamed Eclipse Protocol. The syndicate had planned to use the millionaire's wedding as a distraction while they launched a series of coordinated attacks on key infrastructure around the world: power grids, communication networks, financial systems. The goal was to create global chaos, leaving the world vulnerable to their control. They were going to use your wedding as a cover, Kane explained, his voice grim. While everyone was focused on the ceremony, they would have executed their plan. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it would have been too late. The millionaire's hands trembled as he scrolled through the files. And I would have been the face of it, he said, his voice filled with horror. They would have made it look like I was behind everything. The boy nodded. That's why they needed you, he said. Your wealth, your influence, it was the perfect cover. And once they had control, they would have used you to manipulate the world. The millionaire sank back in his chair, his mind reeling. He had always thought of himself as a good man, someone who used his wealth to help others. But now, he realized how close he had come to being used as a pawn in a game he didn't even understand. We have to stop them, he said, his voice firm. We can't let this happen. Kane nodded. We've already exposed them, he said. But we need to make sure they can't regroup. That means taking out their leadership and dismantling their network. The boy looked up at the millionaire, his eyes filled with determination. And we need your help, he said. You're the only one who can get close to them now. The millionaire hesitated, his heart pounding. What do you need me to do? The boy and Kane exchanged a glance, then Kane spoke. We need you to play along, he said. Act like you're still on their side. Get us access to their inner circle. And then, we take them down. The millionaire's stomach churned at the thought of facing Emily again, of pretending everything was fine. But he knew there was no other way. All right, he said finally. I'll do it. The boy smiled, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Thank you, he said quietly. You're doing the right thing. The millionaire nodded, though his heart was heavy. He thought of the future the boy had shown him, the ruined world, the faces of people suffering because of his actions. He couldn't let that happen. No matter what it took. What's the plan? He asked, his voice steady. Kane leaned forward, his expression serious. We'll need to move fast, he said. The syndicate will be on high alert now that their operatives have been arrested. But if we can get to their headquarters, we can shut them down for good. The boy tapped a few keys on the laptop, pulling up a map. Their main base is here, he said, pointing to a location marked with a red dot. It's heavily guarded, but if we can get inside, we can access their central system and disable their operations. The millionaire studied the map, his mind racing. How do we get in? Kane smirked. That's where you come in, he said. You're going to walk right through the front door. The millionaire's eyes widened. What? You're still one of them, as far as they know, Kane explained. If you show up and say you want to help, they'll let you in. And once you're inside, you can disable their security systems and let us in. The millionaire took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. And what if they don't believe me? The boy placed a hand on his arm, his expression serious. They will, he said. You just have to sell it. The millionaire nodded, though his stomach was in knots. He knew this was their only chance. All right, he said. Let's do this. As they finalized their plan, the millionaire couldn't shake the feeling that this was the most important moment of his life. The future, his future, depended on what happened next. The syndicate's headquarters loomed ahead, a sleek, modern building hidden deep in the mountains. The millionaire stood at the edge of the forest, his heart pounding as he stared at the imposing structure. This was it, the moment of truth. He glanced at the boy and Cain, who were crouched beside him, their faces tense but determined. "Remember the plan," Cain whispered. "Get inside, disable the security systems, and let us in. We'll handle the rest." The millionaire nodded, though his hands were trembling. He had never been a man of action, but he knew there was no turning back now. The future, his future, depended on what he did next. "You can do this," the boy said, his voice filled with quiet confidence. "We're counting on you." The millionaire took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "All right," he said. "Let's go." He stepped out of the forest and walked toward the building, his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. As he approached the entrance, 2 guards stepped forward, their guns raised. "Stop right there," one of them barked. "Identify yourself." The millionaire raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. "It's me," he said, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "I need to speak with Emily." The guards exchanged a glance, then lowered their weapons. "She's expecting you," one of them said, stepping aside to let him pass. The millionaire's heart skipped a beat. "She's expecting me?" He hadn't anticipated that. But he couldn't afford to hesitate now. He walked through the doors, his eyes scanning the interior of the building. It was sleek and sterile, with white walls and fluorescent lights. The air was cold, and the silence was unnerving. He followed the signs to the security room, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. When he reached the door, he hesitated for a moment, then pushed it open. Inside, a single technician sat at a console, monitoring the building's systems. "Can I help you?" the technician asked, looking up. The millionaire forced a smile. "Emily sent me," he said. "She wants me to check the security systems. Make sure everything's running smoothly." The technician frowned. "I wasn't told about this." The millionaire's mind raced. "It's last minute," he said, his tone firm. "You know how she is." The technician hesitated, then shrugged. "All right. Just don't touch anything." The millionaire nodded, stepping closer to the console. He glanced at the screen, his eyes scanning the controls. He had no idea what he was doing, but he knew he had to act fast. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small device the boy had given him, a USB drive designed to override the security systems. "What's that?" the technician asked, his eyes narrowing. The millionaire didn't answer. He plugged the drive into the console and pressed a button. The screen flickered, then went dark. "What did you do?" the technician demanded, jumping to his feet. The millionaire stepped back, his heart pounding. "I'm sorry," he said. "But this is for the best." Before the technician could react, the door burst open, and Cain and the boy rushed in. Cain disarmed the technician with a swift move, while the boy quickly accessed the console. "Security systems are down," the boy said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "We have 5 minutes before they reboot." Cain nodded, his expression grim. "Let's move." They left the security room and made their way to the central control room, where the syndicate's leaders were gathered. The millionaire's heart raced as they approached the door. He could hear voices inside, Emily's among them. "Ready?" Cain whispered. The millionaire nodded, though his hands were trembling. "Ready." Cain kicked the door open, and they rushed inside. The room was filled with syndicate operatives, all of whom turned in shock as the intruders entered. Emily stood at the head of the table, her eyes widening in surprise. "You," she said, her voice filled with venom. "I should have known you'd betray us." The millionaire stepped forward, his voice steady despite the fear coursing through him. "It's over, Emily," he said. "We've exposed you. The world knows the truth." Emily's lips curled into a cruel smile. You think this changes anything? She said. We're everywhere. You can't stop us. Kane raised his gun, his expression grim. We'll see about that. The room erupted into chaos as the syndicate operatives drew their weapons. The millionaire ducked behind a table, his heart pounding as bullets whizzed past him. Kane and the boy moved with precision, taking down the operatives one by one. We need to shut it down, the boy shouted, pointing to a large console at the center of the room. The millionaire nodded, crawling toward the console. He reached it just as an operative lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. They struggled for a moment, but the millionaire managed to push him off and slam his fist into the console. Sparks flew, and the room was plunged into darkness. It's done, the boy shouted. The system's offline. Emily screamed in rage, lunging at the millionaire. But before she could reach him, Kane stepped in, disarming her and pinning her to the ground. It's over, he said, his voice firm. The millionaire stood up, his chest heaving. He looked around the room, at the fallen operatives and the ruined console. It was over. They had done it. Epilogue. Weeks later, the millionaire stood on the balcony of his estate, looking out at the sunset. The world was still reeling from the syndicate's exposure, but the worst had been averted. Governments were working together to dismantle the organization, and the millionaire had used his wealth to help rebuild what had been damaged. The boy stood beside him, his expression thoughtful. You did it, he said quietly. You changed the future. The millionaire smiled, though his heart was heavy. We did it, he said. I couldn't have done it without you. The boy nodded, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness. I have to go soon, he said. My mission is complete. I need to return to my time. The millionaire's heart ached at the thought. Will I ever see you again? The boy hesitated, then shook his head. I don't think so, he said. But that's okay. You've got a second chance now. Make the most of it. The millionaire nodded, his eyes filling with tears. I will, he said. I promise. The boy smiled, then turned and walked away, disappearing into the light of the setting sun. The millionaire watched him go, his heart filled with gratitude and hope. He had been given a second chance, a chance to make things right. And he wasn't going to waste it. This concludes the story with a heartfelt resolution and a powerful life lesson. Let me know if you'd like to refine any part of it further.